My opponent tonight is activist Christian Picciolini. His book is called White American Youth, My Descent into America's Most Violent Hate Movement and How I Got Out. Christian Picciolini, everybody. Christian, welcome.
It's good to be here, George.
Christian, I want to jump right into this. So you used to be a skinhead.
That's correct.
And then you stopped. Walk me through that change of opinion, but also how you got into that world to begin with.
You know, growing up, I was a pretty marginalized kid. I didn't have a lot of friends, and I was bullied, and I didn't really know what my identity or what my community was. And I spent 14 years struggling with where I belonged. And one day, at 14 years old, I was standing in an alley smoking a joint, and a man came up to me, and he pulled the joint from my mouth, and he looked me in the eyes, and he said, "That's what the communists and the Jews want you to do to keep you docile." And that, for me, was really the first time that I felt acceptance from anybody.
So you found yourself in this world, kind of thrust into this world,
Yeah.
and then you found your way out of that. What was that process?
Well, I spent 8 years involved in America's first neo-Nazi skinhead group, and I had doubts every day for those 8 years because I wasn't raised a racist. I learned it for acceptance.
What does that mean? You weren't raised, but you learned it. Like, where do you learn that from?
So I learned it being a part of this skinhead group, and it didn't start out as hateful at first. It started out with playing on my feelings of pride, of being Italian, of being European. And then eventually, as time went on, they would find somebody to blame for taking that pride away from me. And they would blame everybody from Jews to gays to blacks. And I believed it because I wanted to belong so badly. Mm-hmm. But what I got out eventually was I started to receive compassion from the people I least deserved it from when I least deserved it. People that I thought I hated started to show me empathy and compassion, and I started to humanize them. And it was the first time I had a meaningful interaction with the people I thought I hated.
How old were you then?
I was 22 when I left the white supremacist movement in 1995.
1995. How does one leave the white supremacist movement?
It's actually really difficult, not only for security issues, and fear for your life, but also because when you become a part of this movement, you give up everything that's important to you. And this is the only identity, community, and purpose that you have. So leaving that behind and starting over is often a barrier for most people to leave.
A lot of people talk about hate groups and the rise of hate groups in
Yes.
America. How do you see that today?
Well, there is absolutely a rise in hate groups, but that's not the number that I go by. We see a rise in hate crimes and xenophobic activity, and that's really what I go by, because I know that 30 years ago, we tried to change the image of the movement. We knew that we were turning away the average American white racist with our swastika tattoos and our shaved heads. So at that point, we decided we were going to try and normalize that. We were going to grow our hair out, trade in our boots for suits, to go to college campuses to recruit where young people may feel marginalized or are developing their new identities.
You're saying this is white supremacists who are now taking time into branding? That's the focus?
Absolutely. And they're now using terms like white nationalist and alt-right, which I know that they just sat in a room one day and they said, what can we call ourselves to make ourselves seem less hateful? We used to call ourselves white separatists to the public, but behind closed doors, we were saluting neo-Nazis.
Well, is that fair to call the alt-right? Is the alt-right an extension of that? Because right now the alt-right is seen, some people see it as an extension, some people just see it as an extension of a political ideology.
You know, I think that's how they're fooling people, is by latching on to right-wing politics, when in fact they're far-right extremists or terrorists even in some cases. But I do believe that what we started 30 years ago led to what we're seeing today with the repackaging and even more palatable words that they're using. We used to call it the global Zionist conspiracy, and now they're calling it globalism. We used to call it the Jewish media that we thought controlled everything, and now they're calling it the liberal media.
Well, but not everybody who calls it the liberal media has a racial identity behind that.
No, but I think that's
Some
the
people
power.
like to just put people down. It's just an easy slang.
Right. But that's the power of how normalized the language can get.
You talk about white terrorism.
Yes.
Now, I listen to our president, I listen to Tucker, and I know about terrorism, but I know about Muslim terrorism.
Right.
Are you just co-opting this idea of Muslim terrorism for this idea of white terrorism?
No, actually, most people don't know, but since 9/11, more Americans have been killed on U.S. soil by white supremacists than by any other foreign or domestic terrorist group combined. There have been hundreds, if not thousands, of murders committed, everything from Charleston to Charlottesville, Oak Creek, Wisconsin, to Portland. And we, as a country, for some reason, have a hard time calling it terrorism, even though it is ideologically based, even though it is meant to instill terror in the name of a political motive. And we have yet to call it terrorism, and I think until we do, we won't really understand, or we'll be equipped to deal with this problem of white terrorism that's growing.
I want to talk a little bit about life after hate. This is an idea of getting people in a similar position as you and bringing them back to the mainstream. Is that fair to say?
Well, helping them find their path back on the road to life.
How do you maneuver a path like that?
Well, first of all, I listen, and I listen for what
It already sounds too hard.
It's not easy listening to some pretty awful language, but I listen because what I'm trying to identify are the potholes that they've hit in their life's journey. It could be trauma, it could be mental health issues, it could be unemployment, or even extreme privilege. And then what I try and do is I try and fill in those potholes, because when people are more resilient, when they have more self-esteem, there's less of a need to blame the other. But I don't stop there. I do challenge them ideologically in a non-aggressive way. I'll introduce them to the people that they think that they hate. I've spent hours with Holocaust deniers and Holocaust survivors, Islamophobes, and Muslim families and imams, and even homophobes and LGBTQ communities. Because what happens is they begin to humanize then, instead of the demonization and the prejudice that's in their head. And in many cases, that's the first time that they've ever had an interaction with somebody they think that they hate.
I want to get your take on our president.
I think that our president is a Trump supremacist more than anything else. That he is only worried about what's happening to him, and that he has his own intentions.
So is that a bad thing? Shouldn't we all be? I guess, shouldn't I be a Jordan supremacist? Shouldn't you be a Christian supremacist? I guess that gets confusing, but...
That would be a little confusing. I think the President of the United States has a duty to represent everybody and to make decisions based on, everybody's best interest and not just his own.
His new book is called White American Youth, My Descent into America's Most Violent Hate Movement and How I Got Out. Christian Picciolini, everybody.